spark in the shadows. Nestled in the northern periphery of classical Greece, the kingdom of Macedon once lingered in the shadows of more illustrious city-states like Athens and Sparta. Few could have predicted that this unassuming realm, seen as semi-barbaric by its southern neighbors, would birth an empire that stretched from the Aegean Sea to the banks of the Indus River. The Macedonian Empire would come to define the Hellenistic world, leaving behind a legacy of culture, military strategy, and ambition that shaped history for centuries. This is the epic truth of how it rose in thunderous glory and fell into the echoes of time. Foundations of a kingdom, Macedon before the glory. Long before Alexander the Great etched his name into history, Macedon was a modest kingdom fraught with internal strife and external threats. It was a land of rugged terrain, stubborn tribes, and shifting alliances. Founded around the 8th century BCE, Macedon was ruled by a royal house that claimed descent from Heracles, lending it divine legitimacy. Yet this connection to myth did little to elevate the kingdom's status among its more sophisticated neighbors to the south. To the elite of Athens or Corinth, Macedonians were little more than mountain-dwelling barbarians. Their dialect was coarse, their customs strange, and their kings prone to feuding. And yet, beneath this veneer of backwardness, Macedon held strategic riches. Fertile plains that yielded abundant grain, forests that provided timber for fleets, and access to both inland trade routes in the Aegean coastline. It was a land waiting to be molded by a visionary hand. The architect of power, Philip II's vision. That visionary arrived in the form of Philip II. When Philip ascended the throne in 359 BCE, Macedon teetered on the edge of collapse. Enemies pressed in from all directions, the Illyrians from the west, Thracians from the east, and disloyal clans from within. Yet Philip, seasoned by years spent as a political hostage in Thebes, had absorbed lessons in Greek politics, warfare, and diplomacy that he would now apply with ruthless precision. One of his first acts was to transform the military. He introduced the sarissa, an unwieldy pike more than twice the length of a traditional Greek spear. To wield it effectively required intense training, but Philip's new professional army adapted quickly. The phalanx formation he pioneered became nearly unstoppable, a forest of spears moving as one. With his army secure, Philip turned to diplomacy and war, often blurring the lines between the two. Through marriage alliances, well-placed bribes, and decisive battles, he brought much of mainland Greece under his control. His crowning achievement was the formation of the League of Corinth, a confederation of Greek states that recognized Philip as their leader. For the first time in history, Greece was united, not by shared ideals but by the sword of Macedon. Yet even as he celebrated his triumph, Philip was already dreaming bigger. Persia, the ancient foe of the Greeks, lay vulnerable. He began preparations for an invasion that would avenge past wrongs and secure eternal glory. But in 336 BCE, at a royal wedding in Aegae, Philip was assassinated, struck down by a bodyguard in a moment of sudden betrayal. The torch of conquest passed to his 20-year-old son, Alexander. Alexander the Great, the meteoric rise. When Alexander III took the throne, the world watched with skepticism. Could this young man, barely past adolescence, control the fractious nobility, command the army, and fulfill his father's grand designs? The answer came swiftly and violently. To assert his authority, Alexander quashed revolts with decisive brutality. The city of Thebes, which dared to defy him, was razed to the ground. In its ashes, he sent a clear message. The age of doubt was over. With Greece pacified, Alexander turned his gaze eastward to the Persian Empire. The year was 334 BCE when Alexander crossed the Hellespont with 35,000 soldiers and an iron will. At the Battle of the Granicus River, he charged into enemy lines, nearly losing his life but securing a dramatic victory. This battle set the tone for his campaign, fearless, audacious, and brilliant. At Issus in 333 BCE, he faced King Darius III and a vastly superior force. Against all odds, Alexander's tactics prevailed, forcing Darius to flee and leaving his family in Macedonian hands. It was a humiliation that Darius would never recover from. The true jewel came in 331 BCE at Gaugamela, a sprawling battlefield in Mesopotamia. Here, Alexander faced the full might of the Persian Empire. With clever feints and impeccable timing, he pierced the Persian lines and shattered Darius's army. Babylon, Susa, and the opulent city of Persepolis fell in quick succession. The empire that had once threatened Greece was now at Alexander's feet. In Egypt, he was hailed not just as a king, but as a god. He founded the city of Alexandria on the Nile Delta, envisioning it as a beacon of learning and trade. Even today, the city bears witness to his dream. But Alexander was not content. He pressed on into Central Asia, through the arid mountains of Bactria and into the lush valleys of the Indus. In 326 BCE, at the Battle of the Hydaspes River, he faced King Porus and his war elephants. Rain poured, the terrain was treacherous, and the elephants terrified even the seasoned Macedonian phalanx. Yet Alexander prevailed, impressed enough by Porus's valor to appoint him as satrap. Still, his men were weary. They had marched for years across thousands of miles. When they reached the edge of the known world, they refused to go farther. Alexander, with great reluctance, turned back. The empire without a master, Alexander's sudden death. In the summer of 323 BCE, while resting in the palace of Babylon, Alexander was struck by a sudden illness. He suffered for days, his mighty body racked with fever and pain. Then at just 32 years of age, the man who had conquered the world was gone. Chaos ensued. Alexander had left no clear successor. His wife Roxana was pregnant, but the child, Alexander IV, had not yet been born. The generals, stunned and power-hungry, argued over whether to wait for the child to come of age or divide the empire among themselves. Without its master, the empire trembled. The unity forged by one man's ambition began to fracture, splintering into rivalries that would soon erupt into all-out war. The fractured inheritance. Wars of the Diadochi. The empire that Alexander built was too vast, too diverse, and too centered on his unique charisma to survive him intact. His leading generals, men who had marched with him through deserts and over mountains, now turned on one another in a brutal contest for power. Initially, a regency was declared for the infant Alexander IV and his half-uncle Philip III. But this uneasy arrangement quickly fell apart. Ptolemy seized Egypt, declaring himself satrap and later king. Seleucus carved out a vast territory stretching from Syria to the borders of India. Antigonus and his descendants claimed Macedon and the surrounding lands. Each of these warlords styled himself as the heir to Alexander's vision, but none could restore the unity he had imposed. The wars of the Diadochi raged for decades, painting the former empire red with blood. Treachery became common. Alliances shifted like desert sands. Even the memory of Alexander was weaponized, as each faction sought to cloak its ambition in the shroud of legitimacy. Over time, the sprawling empire resolved into a series of independent Hellenistic kingdoms, each bearing the stamp of Macedonian culture, but walking its own path. Macedon under the Antigonids, the final flicker. Amid the chaos, Macedon itself remained under the rule of the Antigonid dynasty. For over a century, they fought to preserve their dominance in Greece, fending off challenges from both within and beyond. Yet a new power was rising across the Adriatic, one that would ultimately eclipse the legacy of even Alexander. Rome, a republic of disciplined legions and relentless ambition, began to assert its influence in the Hellenistic world. Clashes between Macedon and Rome escalated into 4 successive Macedonian Wars. At first, the Macedonians held firm, their phalanx still formidable. But tactics had changed. The Roman manipular legion proved more flexible and adaptive than the rigid Macedonian lines. In 168 BCE, at the Battle of Pydna, King Perseus faced the full might of Rome. His defeat was decisive. The phalanx broke, and with it, the illusion of Macedonian supremacy. By 146 BCE, Macedon was absorbed into the Roman Republic. The empire that once sought to rule the world had become a province of another. Legacy of the Macedonian Empire. Though the empire crumbled, its echoes continued to shape the ancient world. Alexander's campaigns had not just redrawn borders, they had redrawn minds. Greek became the language of science, art, and governance across the Eastern Mediterranean. Cities founded in Alexander's name blossomed into centers of learning, commerce, and culture. Alexandria in Egypt became home to the Great Library, where scholars attempted to gather all the world's knowledge. The fusion of Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and Indian traditions created a vibrant Hellenistic civilization that endured for centuries. Philip's innovations in warfare laid the groundwork for future military tactics. Alexander's dream of a universal empire inspired Roman emperors, medieval kings, and modern visionaries. In uniting East and West, even if only briefly, he laid the foundation for a more interconnected world. Myths, mysteries, and eternal fascination. The story of the Macedonian Empire is rich with enduring legends. Alexander is remembered not only as a conqueror, but as a figure shrouded in myth. He never lost a battle, even when outnumbered. He cut the Gordian knot with his sword, fulfilling a prophecy that the one who did so would rule Asia. He named more than 20 cities after himself, leaving behind monuments to his ego and vision. His horse, Bucephalus, was so cherished that when it died, Alexander founded a city in its honor. To this day, the location of his tomb remains a tantalizing mystery, lost to time, but never to memory. The empire that dreamed beyond horizons. The Macedonian Empire, though brief in years, was titanic in impact. It stood as a testament to the power of vision and the will to defy limits. From the rugged hills of Macedon to the sands of Egypt and the rivers of India, the empire carried with it the spark of Hellenism, lighting fires that would burn long after its fall. In the words of Alexander himself, "There is nothing impossible to him who will try." His empire may have crumbled, but its story, bold, tragic, and magnificent, continues to inspire the world. Don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and hit that subscribe button to be first in line to discover the Persian Empire.